Saddam was arrested today, and he was the head of a Ba'ath party, and it was clear from his answers that he does not even think of apologizing to the Iraqi people. Saddam Hussein was head of al-Ba'ath, and Ba'ath party was full of criminals. He killed the Iraqi people. He buried more than 1 million people in the mass graves. Me, the colleagues, and I really care more about the victims of Saddam more than about Saddam himself. The procedures that is taken against the Ba'athists were not violent and not personal. We do not want to attack their families, but in the committee we have certain specified procedures, and also we have a very easy, significant procedure. We do not want just to prosecute anybody or anybody who did not or had not any role in these crimes, but we want to get rid of this party and its organization and any impact it has on the Iraqi people and forever. And we want to get rid of al-Ba'ath forever, and this is confirmed by the arrest of Saddam Hussein today.
Can you raise your voice?
Forget about the microphone.
Raise your voice, raise your voice.
Capture of Saddam Hussein means a great victory as well, also for the Kurdish community in Iraq. Does it mean that the people suffered under the regime of Saddam Hussein, the victims of Anfal and Halabja, will get in the final victory or final political
well, there
on that issue?
There is a process of compensation for all the victims of Saddam Hussein, the Kurds and others, and this process has been established by the Governing Council, and we shall continue.
علاء الصفار من جريدة الدعوة.
Ali Safar from Al-Dawa magazine. We congratulate you and the Iraqi people and humanity all over for the arrest of the biggest criminal in the world. The question is, will the interrogations be held by the Iraqi people, and could it lead to getting information on like codes or information that Saddam Hussein only knows? Definitely the process will be by the Iraqi. The interrogations, the investigators will be Iraqis. Will it be like public? The trial will be public. What about the investigations? Investigations, no. The investigations, when the investigations are over, then the trial will start, and the result of investigations will be disclosed during the trial. We will comply with all the international law and standards of investigations. Iraq has achieved a victory by arresting this tyrant, but we will still comply with democracy, with the international law, with the judicial international law process.
نعم قال أنه
He said
أن الأمريكان سيأتون
that
العراق وأنه
the Americans will come. He did claim that the Americans will come to Iraq and that he will resist them.
إسماعيل عبد المجيد القطان صحيفة المنارة البصرية. هل كنتم
Were you expecting as a council, were you waiting for the arrest of Saddam Hussein in order to go on with your programs in rebuilding Iraq? No, we always were hoping that he would be arrested, but we were working all the time for rebuilding Iraq.
عندنا فرص أخرى أخويا، فرص أخرى.
You are watching special live coverage on the Fox News channel. I'm Linda Vester along with John Scott in New York. The most important news of the day, Saddam Hussein has been captured alive near his hometown of Tikrit in an operation known as Red Dawn.
The guy who disappeared from the face of the earth back in April 9th, the day Baghdad fell, found hiding in that hole in the ground, a spider hole, the military calls it. He was taken without a fight and without a shot.
But he was also captured apparently with about $750,000 U.S. in $100 bills, 2 AK-47s, a pistol, and two insignificant members of his regime, possibly bodyguards. And once again, we are told that it happened without a shot. Amazing to think, after months of trying to search for this man and his eluding capture, they finally took him without a single shot. Apparently, according to Lieutenant General Ricardo Sanchez, he was absolutely resigned to his fate.
A man who almost wanted to be caught. Relieved is one of the words that was used to describe Saddam Hussein. You see him here in this picture released by coalition forces before his scraggly beard was shaved off, but that has been shaved. A DNA identification has been made positive. It is, in fact, Saddam.
The first indications of how this all went down have now come into us. Apparently, sometime before 8 p.m. local time in Iraq, troops were working on a series of a couple of tips plus other intelligence information, and they went to the area near Saddam's hometown. They actually went to a town called Al-Adwar, and they searched 2 locations. Unsuccessful, didn't find anything, but they continued a cordon and search operation. It led them to a farmhouse and specifically a mud hut. As they searched the mud hut, they found indications of what they call a spider hole, and this spider hole was about 6 to 8 feet deep, only big enough for Saddam Hussein to hide in. And there he was in the appearance you see on the left-hand side of his screen, and he now has been clean-shaven. He has been positively identified by other senior Iraqi detainees as the tyrant who ruled that country for many years.
It's just after 7 a.m. now on the West Coast. If you are just waking up to this news, this is the video that was played at a news conference with Paul Bremer just a couple of hours ago. This is the video looking down into that so-called spider hole where Saddam Hussein was found. It's about 6 feet by 8 feet. It has a ventilation fan up in the corner to allow him to breathe. There's a very small entrance, very well concealed. You can see the boots of the videographer, and these are the first images we saw of Saddam Hussein. The cheers that you hear erupting are cheers from journalists who had been assembled to hear the words of Paul Bremer. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we got him."
And the imagery is powerful. This is a man who is believed to have murdered hundreds of thousands of innocent Iraqis, even 40 members of his own family. And there he was in this footage, reduced to a simple captive, a man with a tongue depressor in his mouth being checked for head lice. And that is the imagery that is being beamed around the world, and specifically around the Arab world today. A little more information about how the operation went down. Apparently this involved 600 soldiers commanded by Major General Ray Odierno of the Army's 4th Infantry Division. It also included what is known as Task Force 121. This is a special operations task force that was specifically tasked with finding Saddam Hussein. They were all involved. It was Task Force 121 that actually went into the hole and got Saddam under orders, we are told now, not to kill him.
You folks in and around Killeen, Texas can take special pride. The 4th Infantry Division out of Fort Hood also very much involved in this raid. Will we ever hear from the soldier who went down and dug Saddam out of that spider hole? It's an interesting question. That person has not been publicly identified yet.
No, but we have been getting indications that they are at least planning some sort of news conference out of Tikrit with members of the task force who were involved in the operation. Once again, about 600 soldiers commanded by Colonel John Hickey. We're talking about cavalry, we're talking about engineers, artillery, aviation, and again, special operations. And apparently it took somewhere between an hour and a half. 8 p.m. local is when we were told that they actually assaulted the first 2 places and found no indication of Saddam, and then went further on in this coordinated search operation. By about 9 p.m. is when they had cordoned the area and then removed Saddam Hussein. Now, it's being reported that he's going to be brought to trial there in Iraq. It's being reported by members of the Iraqi Governing Council. However, the U.S. military is not being so definitive right now. They have not said, and at this point there is no death penalty in Iraq. So that is still unclear as to what the U.S. military will do now that it is holding him in a secure location.
President Bush got the first indications that Saddam had been captured yesterday about 3:15 Eastern Time. That was a phone call from Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. It was confirmed to him early this morning, about 5 a.m. Eastern Time, in a phone call from Condoleezza Rice, his national security advisor. We're going to be hearing from Jim Angle, our White House correspondent, momentarily. Right now, though, we want to take you to Baghdad and our correspondent, Simon Marks. Simon?
Hi, it's actually David Pipe here at the moment.
Nonetheless, fascinating developments over in Iraq, and the news conference that we've been watching over the course of the last hour involving the Iraqi Governing Council is terribly important historically for Iraqis, and it also gave us a sense for the first time of the mood of Saddam Hussein after his capture, because those members of the Governing Council confirmed that they had not only had an opportunity to see Saddam Hussein following his capture, but they'd had an opportunity to speak to him. Now, every single Iraqi must have wondered at some point what question they would most like to put to Saddam Hussein if they ever got the opportunity. Those members of the Governing Council got their chance today, and their questions, they said, all revolved around the fate of Iraqi Shiite clerics who had been killed by Saddam Hussein, other resistors who had fought against the rule of Saddam's regime. And they reported at that news conference that Saddam expressed absolutely no remorse for his crimes. He offered no apologies to the Iraqi people. They asked him about specific Shiite clerics that had been put to death. He told them that those clerics were terrorists and that they should go and ask the Iraqi people about the crimes committed by those clerics before trying to bring him to justice over those issues. So the stage set for not just an incredible day today, but perhaps for many incredible days ahead, because the Governing Council says it's going to put Saddam Hussein on trial in public, and its members say that he is in a mood of resistance and not expressing any remorse. So the trial that takes place, if indeed it does come to trial in Baghdad, is going to be a quite extraordinary event, I would suggest, on a par with the Nuremberg trials that followed the end of the Second World War, possibly even more dramatic, because of course Adolf Hitler killed himself and was never put on trial at Nuremberg. Here in Iraq, not only does the United States have a significant number of former regime members, it also now has in custody the ace of spades himself, Saddam Hussein, and this is going to be a quite remarkable moment in history. It's also worth noting that today is very important for the members of the Iraqi Governing Council as far as Iraqi domestic politics is concerned, because many of those people you saw on the screen during that news conference over the past hour or so spent many of Saddam's years living in exile. They have only recently returned to Iraq. They are not widely known to the Iraqi people, and this was an extraordinary opportunity for them today to break the news of Saddam Hussein's arrest to the people of Iraq and to try and establish their own credibility and to try and enhance their own reputations with those people who presumably one day will be voting in a free and fair election in Iraq. John?
Simon Marks reporting from Washington. Thank you, Simon.
Another piece of news coming into Fox News Channel via some reliable military sources is when this raid went down, the Iraqi tipster who led to the location of Saddam Hussein, of course that person theoretically would be awarded the $25 million bounty, but apparently he was given some sort of down payment to the amount of $25,000. We'll have more details on that shortly. In the meantime, correspondent Rick Leventhal, who is based in Jerusalem currently, has been getting reaction from some of the Marines with whom he was embedded during the Iraq conflict. Rick?
Yes, Linda, and I actually woke some of them up because it was about 5 a.m. Pacific time when word of this arrest broke. One of the guys I talked to was Officer Brandon Austin. He was in the Marines as a reservist, and now he's a police officer in Marin County, California. He was actually on his way home from work. He told me that he was booking a guy into the jail when he looked up at the television in the booking area and saw the news that Saddam had been arrested and immediately, or captured, and immediately talked to the dispatcher and asked her to put it out over the airwaves, over the radio, to all the other police officers on duty to let them know what had just happened. He's very excited. He said that this is the cream of the experience, that it's vindication. He said that a weight on all the fighting forces has now been lifted, and that he thinks that a lot of people in Iraq were resisting because they believed that Saddam might come back into power. And he said, I don't know what they have to fight for now. I also woke up Lieutenant Dave Stagaitis, who was from the 3rd LAR. He was the commanding officer of Alpha Company. He said, outstanding. He also said that he felt, after seeing the pictures of the Iraqis celebrating in the streets, that certainly this now justified what they went in there to do. He still believes there could be sporadic attacks, maybe even a spike at first as people react angrily to the word that Saddam had been captured, but he does think that things will improve over time. And finally, Linda, I woke up Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Cooper, who commanded the 223, led them into East Baghdad, and was one of the many people who were searching for Saddam Hussein. I asked him if he was upset he wasn't the one to catch him. He said, no, I'm just glad we got him. He also is going back to Iraq early next year with the 1st Marine Division, and he said his wife now feels better that he's going back knowing that Saddam has been caught. When I first woke him up, he said, "You're kidding me." Unbelievable were his first words. Very excited. Said all his Marines are no doubt excited as well. And he thinks that the people in Iraq will now give the Marines and all fighting forces their support and their trust more so now because they know that Saddam has been caught. He's no longer a threat to come back and hurt them. Linda, John.
Rick Leventhal, live in Jerusalem. A little piece of anecdotal information. Fox's Britt Hume has been reporting that the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, was spotted hosting a holiday party last night and seemed to be in extraordinarily good spirits, along with several members of the Pentagon brass, who also were in similarly high spirits. When asked if there was a particular reason, somewhat vaguely, he said nothing. He just had a series of good meetings with senior military leaders, and now we know that it was extremely good, that series of meetings. John.
You can imagine the joy at the Pentagon and elsewhere. This is a man who, according to a recent survey, may have killed 60,000 people just in Baghdad. That doesn't account for the tens of thousands of Kurds who were also slaughtered during his reign, and the victims of the Iran-Iraq war who also died under the tyranny of Saddam Hussein. Let's check in now with Jim Angle at the White House. He's got some more information about how President Bush got the good word. Jim?
Well, one reason Secretary Rumsfeld, John, was so delighted last night was not only did he know, he had shared it with the president. And obviously the president was pleased as well. Now, we've learned that the president was called at about 3:15 yesterday afternoon by Secretary Rumsfeld to raise this matter. The conversation went something like this. Secretary Rumsfeld calls the president. He says, "Now, Mr. President, I have something to tell you, but keep in mind that first reports are often inaccurate." The president says, "Sounds like good news." Secretary Rumsfeld says, "Yes, General Abizaid, who is the commander of CENTCOM forces, General Abizaid reports that U.S. military forces believe they have captured a man that is Saddam Hussein." The president says, "That is good news." And then the conversation went on from there. They discussed how they knew, how confident they were. Rumsfeld said they were quite confident. The president said, "How do they know?" At that point, the Secretary of Defense called commanders in the field and asked them how they knew. and got back to the president immediately and told him it was because of distinguishing marks and characteristics on the man thought to be Saddam Hussein, and that is why they felt good about it. Now, one of the things that happened at that point is the two of them discussed the possibility this could be an imposter, but it looked more and more like, in fact, it was Saddam Hussein. We're also told the president watched this briefing this morning where we learned about all of this, where we saw the pictures of Saddam, and now you can see people celebrating who also saw those pictures. And seeing, of course, is believing. In this thing this morning, you see Iraqi journalists standing up and screaming and pointing at the pictures of Saddam Hussein. The president was watching this news briefing and told people that he was particularly touched by the fact that the Iraqi journalists reacted the way they did. He also talked to Adnan Pachachi, who's the rotating president of the Iraqi Governing Council, and told him he was touched by that. Now, the president, as you know, is scheduled to speak at about noon today from the cabinet room. And to give you some sense of what he is likely to say, we were told this morning that the president believes that this is very good news for the Iraqi people, that Saddam Hussein was a brutal, oppressive dictator who was responsible for decades of atrocities, that the Iraqi people can finally be assured that Saddam Hussein will not be coming back. They can see it for themselves. And as you saw from people dancing in the streets there, they've obviously seen it for themselves. And though Saddam Hussein has often been a man who seemed to have more than 9 lives, many Iraqis are now apparently convinced that the end of the Saddam regime has finally come. John?
There are those, Jim, who have said that President Bush has made it personal between himself and Saddam Hussein. Might that be part of the reason that we haven't heard from the president yet, specifically about his capture?
No, I don't think so. I mean, one of the problems was he was scheduled to go to church this morning. And obviously a little pool of my colleagues goes with him everywhere he goes. I don't think the president wanted his first remarks on something this momentous to be in answer to shouted questions standing out in the snow on the steps of the church. That he wanted something a little more dignified than that, something a little more important to mark this moment, a defining moment, officials are calling it, for the future of Iraq. Obviously, it is very important to the president. It's very good news for the Iraqis. It's very good news for this administration as well. I think the president wants to mark it in as dignified a way as he can. John?
Jim, it's Linda with you as well. And when the president speaks at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific, we'll get more detail. But also, obviously, right after we got word from military officials, we started hearing reaction from world leaders. A question about how they would have found out who in the White House would have been tasked with calling them, and would, say, Karl Rove, the chief political strategist, be in the loop here as well?
He was probably in the loop at some point, but not in the early loop. The president, when he learned, the first thing he did was call Vice President Cheney and National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice and let them know. Now, the actual confirmation that it was indeed Saddam didn't come until about 5 a.m. this morning, when Ambassador Bremer called Condoleezza Rice, and at 5:14 a.m. she called the president to tell him that it was now confirmed that it was indeed Saddam. Now, the president has been making calls. He called Prime Minister Blair. He also called President Aznar of Spain, and he is calling other world leaders. Condoleezza Rice called Secretary Powell and CIA Director George Tenet and some other officials. So word is being spread, but it is the president himself who is calling other world leaders to impart the good news. And obviously, this would be very important for the coalition. Tony Blair, as you know, was one of the first to speak out this morning. Very good news for the coalition and very encouraging news, perhaps the most encouraging moment so far for the prospects of a free Iraq liberated from Saddam Hussein and perhaps now liberated from the ongoing violence if the coalition is able to convince the Saddam holdouts that there is no future for them. Linda.
Jim Engel, live at the White House. Jim, thanks.
It is absolutely going to build the energy level at the White House. As you can imagine, aides have been rushing in from all over the Beltway area to get in there and staff that place up on this Sunday. But again, keeping in mind that the man you see in the middle of the screen as he looks today, Saddam Hussein, who quite literally was dragged out of a hole in the ground where he had been hiding, that it has been confirmed. It is him. He was captured by coalition forces yesterday, primarily U.S. troops, the task force that have been assigned to hunt him down, and also members of the 4th Infantry Division.
At this moment, it is being reported by the Iraqi Governing Council that Saddam Hussein will be put on a public trial for crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide. And some of the evidence will come from a growing cache of documents that have been seized, but also, more importantly, the excavation of some 270 mass graves in Iraq. As of the latest estimate, these 270 mass graves are believed to have held at least 300,000 sets of remains. And this clearly is an incomplete number of those who were killed by Saddam Hussein's regime over many, many years, from 1978 onward, right up until 2003. Saddam Hussein is accused to have killed thousands, actually hundreds of thousands of people, whether it's Kurds, whether it's Shiites, whether it's even members of his own family. The total is expected to be well into the hundreds of thousands.
As we understand it, Linda, there have been about 41 of these mass graves exhumed so far, and they have a list of 270 potential locations. So more than 230 locations still to be checked out. Joining us now on the phone, Tanya Gilley. She is in Iraqi exile, somebody who apparently spent time in one of Saddam Hussein's prisons. Tanya Gilley, I'd like to ask you, as you look at these pictures of that bedraggled man, what goes through your mind?
Well, first of all, I just wanted to say I'm actually very happy to be given the chance to speak today, because it definitely is a very joyous day for me and the Kurdish people and all the Iraqi people, actually. Seeing Saddam caught and seeing him this week has definitely put somewhat of a closure onto the miseries of my people. And hopefully he will be tried in an Iraqi court, where we can all avenge our loved ones.
Tanya, it's Linda Vester with you as well. A question about the resistance. There have been some people who have said that many people who have been involved in the insurgent attacks against Americans have been fighting partly because they believed Saddam Hussein would eventually come back and retake power, and that they wanted to be on his good side. Do you think that's the case?
I think the pockets of terrorism, I'd like to call them, not resistance, are there because they need to fight, because they know their end is near, and they're just basically hanging on to the last thread. And now, unfortunately, I'm foreseeing an increase in the resistance in the few days to come. However, this is definitely going to end it, just because these Ba'athis, these former Ba'athis, think that now that Saddam is gone, their days are definitely numbered, and they need to, it's a basically do-or-die situation for them.
I'm sure you've been paying close attention to the political discussions in this country and really around the world. You know, there were the protests in London over the coalition policies in Iraq, the war that led to, the deposition of this guy, the deposing of this guy. When you think about the numbers, when you think of your own experience, when you talk about perhaps millions of people slaughtered during his regime, do you think the world has ever really gotten the point about what kind of a man has been overthrown here?
Definitely not, because there are still a lot of atrocities that have not been uncovered. And with the capture of Saddam, we will find out more of the things that he has done. For example, hopefully we will find the locations of these mass graves. And just speaking for my family, we know where people from our villages, 2,213 people, their whereabouts are still unknown. They were part of the Anfal campaign. And trying to explain this to the people that have opposed the war, telling them, look, Saddam being gone is a good thing for the world. It's a good thing for all, not just the Iraqi people. It's a good thing for the whole of the Middle East, because once he is gone, the Iraqi people can definitely now start living their lives and start practicing a true democracy that hopefully will influence the rest of the region.
Tanya, back to your what you described as the pocket of terrorism, those holdouts who have been attacking American troops. Now that they see that the game is up, do you think that Iraqis will be coming forward in greater numbers, even greater numbers, to American authorities to point out who these remaining bad guys are?
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's definitely. I just returned back from Kurdistan, Iraq, about 4 days ago. And let me just tell you, people were still afraid, with Saddam not being captured. But now that he has been captured, you will definitely find more and more people will come forward, and they will cooperate now, because for a while people were starting to somewhat lose faith in the process of the capture of Saddam and so on. But now that he has been caught, basically it increases the morale of the people of Iraq and of the coalition military, the coalition forces as well, which will make more people come forward with information that they may have on other former Ba'athis and so on.
Tanya, just for those viewers who might just be joining us here at the bottom of the hour, I just want to restate, if you haven't heard the good news, Saddam Hussein has been captured alive, captured by U.S. forces who didn't have to fire a shot. And we're watching the video of his first medical examination, a bedraggled guy. They're checking his hair for lice, checking his mouth and so forth. His beard has since been shaved, but Saddam Hussein is now in custody. Tanya, here's my question. We throw these numbers around, and they are beyond belief. Some Iraqi political parties estimate that perhaps 1 million people were executed under Saddam Hussein. We can't conjure up numbers like that. I'd like you to share some of the personal stories of what happened to some of the people you know under Saddam Hussein.
Well, let me just start again. I'll say this again. I mean, from my family, from the Gili family, our villages, 2,213 people were part of the MFL campaign. 182,000 Kurds are still missing from the MFL campaign. That does not include the more than 5,000 people that were gassed in Halabja and all the mass graves in 1991 that were the cause of the uprising in the south also. With the drying of the marshes, thousands of people have lost their livelihoods. Some have gone, they've disappeared because they refused to leave their homes when the marshes were being drained and so on. And I can go on and on and on. And I definitely, if I just from the figures from my head, I could probably say it probably is over 1 million. And that does not include all the prison cleansing campaigns that we saw in the recent years, where because the prisons of Saddam were so full of people, they would just go on these execution sprees by shooting them and so on, just so they have more room for new political prisoners.
Tanya Gili, Iraqi exile, thank you very much. Once again, the footage that you've been seeing of Saddam Hussein is so powerful. This is a man who oppressed and terrified all of his people for more than 30 years. He was so feared, he was almost an Orwellian big brother figure in the country of Iraq. So to see him in such a reduced state, as a captive, as a humble, frightened man himself, is very powerful to Iraqis. Most important is finding out how they got the word themselves. They got the word themselves in their cities, in their towns around Iraq. David Piper, our correspondent in Baghdad, has more details on how they learned the news. David?
Hi, Linda. Yes, rumours spread very quickly here in Iraq, and that big rumour that Saddam had been captured caused huge celebratory gunfire around this location. But everybody was waiting for some confirmation from the coalition, and it wasn't long in coming.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
After getting a tip-off, 600 soldiers from the 4th Infantry Division and Special Forces descended on a farmhouse 10 miles south of Saddam's hometown of Tikrit. There they found a disheveled and bearded Saddam hiding in a spider hole. Reports say soldiers had to dig him out. This video of Saddam's capture was immediately beamed around the world from the news conference. He'd actually been captured yesterday evening, but the arrest wasn't announced until the coalition had conducted DNA tests on the man to confirm they had their man. The capture of Saddam is, of course, a massive boost for the coalition, and also Iraqis have been celebrating all over the country, from Kirkuk in the north, the Kurdish north, to the Shiite south and Basra. And there's been celebrations again tonight. Gunfire's been heard around this building, but perhaps one sobering note to mention at this time. Another US soldier died today after he was trying to disarm an explosive device. Now back to you.
David Piper, live in Baghdad. David, thank you very much.
So what is going to happen now with the capture of Saddam Hussein? Coalition leaders are warning there actually could be a spike in violence in the days ahead, even though many people have thought all along that if you get Saddam, it might all come to an end. Let's check in with Lieutenant Colonel Tim Eads. He is in Washington, D.C., and he'll give us some perspective on that. Colonel Eads, what do you think? What are the immediate prospects?
Well, immediately what's going to happen is you're probably going to see an increase in the violence, or at least the attempts at violence by the supporters of Saddam as kind of a retribution for what happened to Saddam, and to try to show they're gonna stay and fight.
Well, and I also wondered too. They've got to pick a new leader there. I mean, he has been in charge. Somebody's got to take charge of this opposition, if you can call it that.
I think they probably have in essence, a chain of command already in place. I don't think Saddam, from what we're seeing of this spider hole, had the command and control apparatus in place to do the kind of things he did. But what's critical now for the U.S. and the coalition forces is that we're at a tipping point now. If we really bear down and focus on stamping out the last of these Saddam loyalists, or showing these Saddam loyalists that it's fruitless to continue, this thing can get rolled up pretty fast in Iraq. Then we can go back and focus into Afghanistan and find Osama bin Laden. That's the next task that we've got to accomplish.
Colonel, when you talk about this tipping point, one of the things that people will be looking for is another tip that leads to Izzat Ibrahim al-Duri. He is the man who's believed to be running the insurgency terror attacks against American troops. I believe it was only a matter of days ago that we captured his wife and I believe one of his kids.
Exactly.
So
his daughter.
His daughter, exactly. And so do you think that this will lead us pretty quickly to al-Duri's capture too?
It very well could, and that's what I said. We really need to put the pressure on right now. We need to protect our forces, because there is going to be some retribution tried to be taken, but at the same point we can't get into go into our base camps and put concertina wire in and not go out. We really got to go out there forcefully, well armed, well equipped, with the best intelligence we can, and jump on these guys as hard as we can jump on them.
I can't imagine, Colonel, what this is going to do for morale of our troops who are over there. I mean, it is a thankless job very often. It's climate-wise and everything else, it's a miserable part of the world to be stationed in. And for them to be getting this news that the guy who has caused so much trouble and caused so many hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, to lose their lives, that he is in custody, that's going to play very well among our soldiers.
Oh, absolutely. And remember, this was the 4th ID was the battalion that actually did the cordon around this location, and then Task Force 121 from the Special Operations went in. But the 4th ID were the guys that were scheduled to come in from the north through Turkey in April when we first started off Iraqi freedom, and the Turks would not allow them to pass through Turkey. So they had to go back, reload or stay on their ships, and go around and come up through Kuwait. So these are some very frustrated soldiers who've been there for a long time, have done a lot of contributions that haven't probably got the pats on the back that the 3rd ID and some of the other Army units have got, and now it's their moment to shine.
Well,
so I'm sure those guys are smoking cigars right now.
It's also true that the 4th ID has taken some of the worst casualties,
Absolutely.
hasn't it?
They have had the best, through luck of the draw, they have had probably the worst area in that Sunni triangle, the worst of the worst in the Sunni triangle. So I'm sure they're welcoming their reward right now.
All right, Lieutenant Colonel Tim Eads, thanks very much for your perspective. We hope you can stick with us. We want to get back to you a little bit later on.
Something both important and fascinating is going to happen about 21 minutes from now. There will be a news conference live from Tikrit, as you know, Saddam Hussein's hometown, but also headquarters of the 4th Infantry Division. We're being told by the U.S. military that there will be, at the base there, the U.S. base there, some of the soldiers who were involved in the capture of Saddam Hussein, who will be answering reporters' questions, talking about how it all went down. That's about 21 minutes from now. You'll see it here live on the Fox News channel. In the meantime, the larger question of how this will affect all sorts of things in the Middle East, worldwide. Former U.S. Ambassador Dennis Ross has just been traveling in the area and has been looking closely at that question. He's live with us now. Ambassador?
Good to see you.
So good to see you as well, and it is a day of celebration for a number of people, certainly civilization in general. But the bigger question, President Bush gave a speech in London recently saying that the United States would no longer look the other way while oppressive elites in the Middle East were
Right.
torturing their own people, et cetera, et cetera. And now this sort of gives added force, it seems, to that message.
Well, I think it does, but I think the more immediate effect in the region is going to be that maybe, in fact, the United States is going to succeed. When I was out there over the last 2 weeks, one of the things I was struck by in Kuwait and in Jordan was an increasing expectation that we would not succeed. And this was coming from two places where their need for our success was paramount. So the reality that Saddam, the symbol, is now going to be gone, the reality that an insurgency that at least is fueled in part by his still being there and a fear that he would come back, that also, I think, will have an effect on the psychology of the region as a whole. So I think in terms of being able to convey a message that the United States will in the end prevail, that message is likely to be much more reinforced today than it's been, at least in recent times.
Just an explanation of what you're seeing on the right-hand side of your screen. This is the U.S. base in Tikrit, Iraq. I mentioned a moment ago that we will be having a live news conference in about 20 minutes from now with some of the soldiers involved in the raid operation that captured Saddam Hussein. Basically, what you're seeing is both U.S. military officials and journalists, sound technicians, et cetera, trying to get everything set up, get the wires or get the microphones wired up, et cetera. We just want to let you have a look at it while we're getting closer to it. And as soon as it begins, we'll take you there live.
Ambassador Ross, I'm curious as to how we should handle the, for lack of a better word, the PR aspects of this capture. I mean, yes, the U.S. forces were responsible for it, but the fact is, this is something that we did on behalf of the Iraqis. They've got to decide what to do with him. They've got the tribunal to set up, or they'll have to set it up in order to try him. What happens now? How should we handle it?
Well, I think there's several different dimensions. One, in terms of the public relations, is to continue to convey this image of him being completely docile, compliant. He, after all, was the embodiment of defiance. And he was able to, I think, mobilize certain passions in the Arab world where there's always this sense that somehow there's been a humiliation. And the powerless stand behind those who stand up to the powerful. Here he is looking like, in fact, even though he was supposed to be defiant, even though he was the embodiment of defiance, he's completely compliant. He's almost resigned. He seems docile. So the more that image is conveyed, the more it will also, I think, undercut the remaining appeal of what he represents. That's number one. Number two, it is critical that the Iraqis be the one to try him, not us, because he will try to turn a trial of him with us into a trial of us. He will try to then recapture the imagery of defiance against us and make this a platform for himself against us. We want this to be the Iraqi people against Saddam Hussein, not Saddam Hussein against the United States.
Also, just simply a message that the legal system can actually work, because for years in Iraq, a trial was something of a joke over there. It was, it was predetermined what was going to happen, and any trial was essentially meaningless. And now it will be proof to the Iraqi people that a civilized system can work in their country. But there are also, there are so many even smaller questions. For years, Saddam Hussein was paying out money to people in the West Bank and Gaza to conduct murder attacks against Israelis. And now that money is dried up. No one's, in theory, there will not be anyone who is paying terrorists to launch those attacks there either.
Well, there will be continuing money that's coming from Iran and Hezbollah that's going to some of the Palestinians. But the point you raise is quite interesting. I was in Ramallah on Thursday, and in talking to a number of the younger Fatah people, they were saying that Hamas was riding higher now because they were basically inspired by what the insurgency was doing in Iraq against us. So think about the ripple effects of this. If it looks like now the insurgency, even if we do in fact see, I think, an increase in the near term, but if it looks like it can't sustain itself over time, it will have its effects elsewhere. Ironically, I think that we may actually see Hamas become more responsive to the idea of a ceasefire.
Ambassador Ross, talk about the politics of this for a minute. Tony Blair has taken a real beating over in Britain, over Britain's involvement in the coalition. President Bush has taken quite a bit of heat in Congress and elsewhere here at home. And anybody could point to the magazine covers that had, Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden still out there walking free. Well, now one of those two is in custody. How does that help the administration and the coalition in their relations with other nations?
Well, I think it helps it because, again, it's at least a symbol of success. All right, first he fell, but he escaped, and he was able to seemingly to be beyond our grasp. And that imagery in Iraq and elsewhere was that maybe somehow he'd come back. So maybe the whole purpose was not going to be achieved in terms of the mission of going into Iraq. I think that's one element, but I think maybe there's another element as well. One of the reasons it's so important to have a trial of him is because then you can begin to unearth publicly and have everybody see what a monster he was. When we begin, in fact, to highlight, in the context of a trial, all the mass graves, maybe 400,000 to 500,000 people dead in mass graves, it's going to be very hard to have a focus on anything but that. It's a very strange reality, but again, just having been in the Middle East, one of the questions I was asking so many of those I was meeting in the Arab world, why is it there is so little concern for the victims of Saddam? The focus on us, the focus on Tony Blair, what we did in the end was stop the madness as it related to the kind of mass extermination of what Saddam was doing and what his regime represented. Well, somehow all of that has been lost, but with a trial by the Iraqis of Saddam, that can be brought into a very clear focus, and I think that will have an effect in the region, in Iraq, and I would suspect here as well.
Ambassador Dennis Ross, thank you very much.
Want to check in with one of the leaders in the United States Senate now. Senator John McCain is in Phoenix, Arizona. Senator McCain, how did you get the news that Saddam Hussein was in custody?
I was sound asleep, and my administrative assistant called me on the telephone and very early this morning, and of course, I was certainly glad he woke me up.
Yeah, and your first reaction, your first words?
Thank God. And I should have added, thank the men and women who serve over there, who've done such a magnificent job, and the ones who are responsible for pulling this off.
Senator, a question about some folks in America who may have been wondering whether or not it was the right thing to go into Iraq, whether or not it was the right thing to risk American lives to take down this regime. Now that Saddam Hussein is not only in captivity, but also will be brought out to trial with all sorts of evidence of his atrocities, do you think sentiment might change a bit?
I hope it does, particularly in Europe, because I think once the European people see the extent of the incredible, horrible things that this guy did for 35 years, that maybe we'll get some more public opinion, which would then translate into more support from our European allies. The United States clearly, this is a great victory for the American people. I don't want to talk politics today, but it's a great victory for the kind of men and women we produce. In the Arab world, this sends a message to the Syrians and the Iranians that we're here to stay. We're there to stay, and we're going to see a democracy in Iraq, and they better start changing their way of doing business because their days may be numbered. And I don't mean militarily. I mean that when there's a functioning democracy in Iraq, the people of Iran and Syria are going to want the same things.
Yeah, I suppose it's possible that Saddam Hussein may know specifically.
Not to realize that this war against terrorism is going to take years. There are going to be no boundaries across this world. It's just a responsibility after what was done to us back in 9/11. It ought to be evident to everybody that we have no choice but to take this war to the shores of the terrorists, no matter where we have to go. So once again, I'm just proud to be American. I'm proud of our president, and I'm extremely proud of all of our servicemen and women that's fighting for us across this world. Thank you.
Norfolk, Virginia, you're on the air.
My name is Dennis Hopebaker. I support the war completely. I think President Bush is doing the right thing. Saddam Hussein's got a hand in terrorism. He supported it. He's helped pay for it. He has weapons of mass destruction. I feel those who oppose the war, oppose the president, oppose the United States, the American flag, our freedom. And if they can't support us, then they need to leave us. Thank you very much.
The Iraqi people now,
long time now, months and months, Ken, been helping us understand the situation before the war. And just last week, we talked for a couple of hours about your visit there. Do you have a feel for how this changes the game on the ground there, or is the issue still to most Iraqis, give me a safe place to live, give me electricity 20 hours, 24 hours a day, give me a job? Those issues haven't changed, and are those the issues that are going to drive events in Iraq more than Saddam's capture?
Absolutely, Aaron. Let me start by saying that you can see it on the streets. There are a lot of Iraqis who are very happy about this, and I think that, as Jane Araf pointed out in her last interview with you, there are probably a lot more who are happy privately. But the simple fact of the matter is that as big a bounce as we're going to get from this, and there are going to be...
Introducing the Infiniti G35.
Maybe it's a few days later, or maybe it's next week. Those Iraqis are going to wake up and they're going to be confronted with the same problems. My wife, my daughters, they can't go out at night. I have to take a gun.
Tom Campbell.
Saddam Hussein was captured just south, a few miles from his hometown of Tikrit, and our correspondent Richard Engel is there now in the area where he was captured. And Richard, I understand you've talked to some of the soldiers who were involved in the raid. What can you tell us?
That's right, Campbell. I'm actually now just on the outskirts of the town Al-Dur. This is south of Tikrit, and where it's just to give you an idea of what happened. Saddam, according to the troops who were involved in this capture, which was last night, it should be mentioned, that Saddam was hiding out in this. Really, you could describe it as a hole in the ground. It was in the middle of an orchard, a field which was on orange grove, and sunflowers and pomegranates were growing there, right along the banks of the Tigris River. It was actually a very low area along the banks where the waters of the Tigris any higher, it would have actually been underwater. So it was in the floodplains of the Tigris River. And one of the soldiers said that he was hiding in a coffin-sized hole that was very tiny. You could easily touch both of the sides. I couldn't actually get up right to see the hole itself. The American soldiers had cordoned off the area, and there were a large crowd of Iraqis who were there. A lot of them were also incredulous. They didn't believe this could happen. Campbell?
No, let me just tell people we are actually showing pictures of it. The military gave us a video that shows pictures of the area where he was staying in the actual hole, as you described it, coffin size, where soldiers dug him out of.
Yes, Campbell, and there was a lot of people, a lot of ordinary Iraqis from Al-Dur who were gathered around this cordon that the U.S. military had set up. This is a very pro-Saddam town. It's not quite a village. It's somewhat larger than that. And this is the town where Izzat al-Duri, or Izzat Ibrahim, Saddam's deputy, hails from. And there's also indications from people who live in the area that the owner of the farmland where Saddam was hiding out may have also been linked to Saddam's personal security through family connections. So this is an area where Saddam has long links, has many friends, and tonight the people who were gathered around in the village were all expressing support for Saddam. They were saying they hoped that it wasn't true and that it wasn't him, and that they hoped that the American forces had captured one of Saddam's many body doubles. So there is definitely an air of a suspension of belief here, Campbell.
Richard, that's a very different reaction than, frankly, what we've been seeing in Baghdad, where people have been celebrating in the streets. What is the feeling among the people there in terms of any possible tension with U.S. forces, given the capture in that particular region, given that there is so much support for him?
The people that I spoke to this evening said that they're going to continue to carry out attacks, that the resistance isn't going to stop. That they still believe in Saddam Hussein and that he was a brave man, and there was a lot of chest thumping and lionizing of the former Iraqi dictator. That is obviously just a small pocket of response. That was probably the reason why Saddam was able to hide out in a place like this. across Iraq in the south and in Baghdad in the north. Obviously, many people would have been celebrating, and I heard on my way up here today, we're north of Baghdad right now, a lot of celebratory gunfire. But there were certainly these pockets, these areas where Saddam was indeed very popular.
NBC's Richard Engel, who is just outside of the area where Saddam Hussein was captured near his hometown of Tikrit. And let's go to Tom.
Yeah, they still have to persuade the Iraqi people that, in fact, it is Saddam Hussein in that area where they continue to be loyal to him, because he did have body doubles, but people both who have seen him from the governing council, and they're doing medical checks on him as well. And it seems to us, as you look at it, that that's indisputably that is Saddam Hussein. Let's go to Republican Senator Chuck Hagel of Nebraska, who's a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He joins us this morning from Washington, D.C. Does this open some new opportunities for the president internationally, in your judgment, Senator?
I think it does, Tom. This was the most significant event since the invasion of Iraq. This gives the president, I would think, certainly more latitude to reach out to more countries, more people. This is going to be very important how this plays out. The tribunal, the Iraqi people's involvement, the Muslim Arab world looking on, being part of this. So I think this is a very significant opening for many reasons, and it's a good day for all of us, Tom.
Senator, as we're going to continue to talk here, we're going to show some video of the house in which Saddam Hussein was captured. A pretty modest dwelling, as you can see, about 10 miles south of his hometown of Tikrit along the Tigris River there. You had some reservations about the United States getting involved militarily in Iraq based on your own experiences in Vietnam. Now that Saddam Hussein has been captured and effectively removed from power, what about the role of the United States in the Middle East on an ongoing basis? Do you think that we're going to be there for the long, long haul?
Tom, we are going to be there for the long haul. My reservations mainly centered around the fact that we were going to require a lot of allies, a long-term effort, a lot of leadership, a lot of resources. We're going to continue to need a lot of help. We're a long way from the finish line being a democratic Iraq. If that can happen, the Iraqis governing themselves, defending themselves, this is significant what happened today. There's no question about it. But we have a long way to go here, and it's going to require an awful lot of help and persistence and leadership from the United States, but in conjunction with and in coordination with, certainly with the Iraqi people, starting with them, because after all, it'll be their decisions that shape and mold their destiny and much the future of the Middle East. Second thing, you can't disconnect our efforts trying to bring about a peace with Israel and the Palestinians. These things are woven into the same fabric.
And what about the presence militarily of the United States in Afghanistan as we begin to draw down in Iraq? Are we going to have to beef up our presence in Afghanistan given the return of the Taliban in many of those areas?
Oh, I think we are, Tom. It was interesting that Secretary Powell, as you know, was in Europe last week, as was Secretary Rumsfeld, reaching out to NATO, asking NATO to really take a larger role in Afghanistan, much larger than what they're doing now, and in fact even extending that involvement to Iraq. So I think it gives you a pretty good indication that our government understands the significant commitment that's going to be required militarily for a long time in both Afghanistan and Iraq.
All right, thanks very much, Senator Chuck Hagel of Nebraska, member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Republican of Nebraska. A reminder, tonight there will be a special edition of NBC Nightly News, also a special edition of Dateline tonight at 7 Eastern Time, and in just a few moments we'll be hearing from some of the soldiers who were involved in that successful raid to capture Saddam Hussein. Campbell?
Tom, we've got some live pictures we want to show people now from Tikrit, where we're expecting to hear from some of the soldiers who were actually involved in the raid and captured Saddam Hussein. And you see there cash, frankly, and as U.S. military officials told us, Saddam was found with about $750,000 with him in that little house where we saw him. Soldiers had dug him out of that hole. So we do expect some of those involved in the raid to be giving us kind of a play-by-play of what they went through.